All right, so um, been playing around with the Nix Linux operating system. So I think I'd heard of Nix. Uh, I'd heard of Nix the package manager before. Okay, so Nix as package manager, I really don't care about this. I mean, there's some interesting principles that go into it. There's some interesting drivers of using Nix as your package manager over um, like brew on a Mac or wget on Windows or just whatever the native package managers are in your Linux distribution, like APK for Alpine or apt for APT for Debian systems. But what was cool, what was very compelling to me was when I first heard about NixOS from a user. So Mitchell Hashimoto is former CEO or CTO or something, maybe both, of HashiCorp that made Terraform. Um, so that company is obviously very into configuration of cloud resources and deployments and all that kind of stuff. So the sort of declarative nature of Nix, I guess, I don't know if it still is, but was interesting to Mitchell Hashimoto. And the so this was my introduction to NixOS was a video that Mitchell posted where he sets up NixOS in a VM on his Mac and just shows how his process. So he sets up a blank VM in, I think it is, oh, what does he use? What program? VMware Fusion. Um, installs NixOS from an ISO and then sort of conf- configures it according to his configuration. So he clones a repo that represents his Nix config and just runs one shell script at the beginning and then runs a process inside of the VM and, from start to finish. I think this is a 9-minute video. I think there's one point where he sort of fast forwards. Um, but then he has his whole operating system installed and configured and like down to all of his dot file preferences configurations. So that was really interesting to me. Um, and so uh, I tried out. I've been playing with Nix. So so right now I'm actually so if I exit here, this screen you're seeing here is very similar to Mitchell's setup. I mean, not that it's highly configured as his was, but this is Nix running in a virtual machine. So if I run like my terminal, I can switch, uh, I have just i3 installed, and I'm not super proud of um, what I've got set up so far. Not that I'm not proud of it, I just haven't played around with it as much. Where I've been more interested in Nix, to be honest, is on the server. So the Hetzner box that I set up, I was able to install Nix there, and so I've been building away, configuring away on this NixOS installation there. Um, and there's some cool things. So like it's a very different way of thinking about the state of your entire operating system. But this is the config file. So this is the main config file that um, drives configuration of the operating system, and not just like settings of the OS. I mean, it does do that, but also every application you install. You can install it with this in this file, there's like syntax for uh, installing programs, but also setting their .file configs and all that kind of stuff. So here's like one early instance, right? I set up my shell. Um, as I was editing Nix, I realized that I was editing this file. So I set up a shell alias here where when I enter NOE, that for me stands for NixOS edit. So that brings me into my HX is my editor Helix, and that brings up Helix in the NixOS config directory. And then the other thing, like once you make a change to something in your Nix config file or that's imported into it, is by running NixOS rebuild and then switch. So that rebuilds the operating system with the config you've just edited, and then switch actually updates the environment that you're in. Nod is NixOS directory, just if I want to come into this directory to like commit it to my repo that holds this config, and then playing around with like xclip and different things. So that's that. Set up my user account. And then this to me is another really cool feature. So home manager is like per user configuration. So what I can do is there's also a syntax to enter the home directory, declare a file, and then this file is my .config directory that would be in a home. I mean, it is in the home directory, but this is just declaring the contents of that file in the Nix configuration. So like, typically you would cd into this config directory, create the Helix directory. If it doesn't exist, create the toml if it doesn't exist. But here you just declare it. So like, this isn't like, if the text doesn't change, updates to your NixOS config don't change the contents of that file. So it's like, it's all declared here. And so I can set up my theme, line number is relative, and then I don't want to ignore my files that are get ignored, so set that flag. Declare similar stuff so that's the root user. This is my config for my personal user, and then I can also set up there's a syntax for just declaring arbitrary Nix files and then importing them into this config. So you can see if I go to the top here, import my secrets from a file, and then so traffic is my reverse proxy I'm setting up on the server. I just have that in its own dedicated file for kind of organization. I set up the traffic container as an OCI container that uses Docker, declare the image, set it up kind of like with, the syntax is a little different, but I just apply labels the same I would in like a Docker compose file. And then I declare config for traffic, again, using this environment.etc. Like this is just saying the etc directory, then create a traffic directory, then create a traffic.yaml, and now this is just the text of that YAML. So I just followed the traffic guide for setting up the YAML file. It's all declared here. So I don't really want to make a change to that, but let me go, let's see if there is something I don't know. There's not really anything I want to change in here right now, but yeah, it's just, to me, this is like a powerful idea, right? That the use of the system is not that different than, when you get new hardware, right? You get a new laptop or whatever, and you power it on, and then if you're installing a new operating system on it or whatever, you boot from some drive or a USB or a CD or whatever, And then that will take you through an install process. And then you like reboot. And then you have a new shiny operating system. And this is all, you do this with Nix too. So we'll just condense this down and say this is like, the sort of normal, uh, fixed process of setting up an OS, right? So this is like your fixed init. And then you just start using the operating, as things come up. You do your first configuration. You maybe, set up an editor here, set up your shell preferences, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you do when you first have a new operating system. And then, you install applications and configure those applications. If you're a developer, you install developer dependencies and you download libraries and spin up containers and whatever. And all of this also is true of, when you're just using this system, days go by and you just transform the system as you use it and as needs come up. But what's cool when like all of this can fit into the configuration.nix, that means that like if you can find a way to do it through config, which so far I haven't found anything. I mean, there's things I'm keeping out of config for sure. Like I'm going to be using in my server, I'm going to be spinning up different containers, different services, all serving them all out of that box. And like, I'm just going to manage those. I'm going to be, set up CI/CD pipelines for as I make changes from my personal laptop or inside the box itself or whatever. Like the state of those applications isn't necessarily tied to the config, but this is stored, in GitHub in a repo. So like anything that I'm like, is this sort of like infrastructure that I want, to use again, to use in new servers, whatever, like it just all goes into this, ultimately fits into this configuration.nix file. And now all I have to do is do this in a server or on a laptop or whatever. This takes like 30 minutes. And then I clone this. So like step 1, step 2, and then step 3 is I run NixOS rebuild switch. And all the months and years of configuring an operating system the way you like it is like there and ready for you. So I find this pretty powerful. I'm excited to use Nix. I've enjoyed it a lot so far. Like very straightforward. It's not that complicated. It makes so much sense. Changing and using an operating system in this way. It's been, 3 or 4 weeks, maybe less, 2 or 3 weeks that I've been doing this, and it just feels pretty natural. And yeah, I think it's the right idea for using, configuring, and setting up an operating system and not losing time going through the same process over and over again when you set up a new server or get new hardware or whatever. So I'm a fan.